So we're going to go through a little bit about the fund, look at what some of the questions in the application are, and I can talk through some of the questions that I received yesterday and by email since then. And again, I want to say that this is a brand new role for the city of Harrisonburg. And so we're learning this alongside you, putting funds to support affordable housing and lining it up with type of development opportunities that exist in Harrisonburg is something we're going to learn to do together. I really do want to hear everyone's questions. It's the only way we're going to learn and improve the process so that we can hopefully make solutions that are even better. A little bit of background on this particular pot of funding. The city of Harrisonburg received $23.8 million in ARPA dollars, and when public engagement was conducted, housing was identified as a big priority. Several $1 million are already going into the homeless shelter, and City Council allocated an additional $2 million for a housing development fund. We aren't setting a maximum request amount for that. You can ask for the whole $2 million. I'll be getting to the slides on how we're going to evaluate requests, and there's no set number of awards. We are open to entertaining all the applications we receive and evaluating them based on the criteria that I'm going to go through. First, just a little bit about this as a funding source, the ARPA money. It is federal money. There are some conditions that come with that. Recipients from the Housing Development Fund will be subrecipients, and the guidelines come from Department of Treasury. Harrisonburg is required to report on how the money is spent, and so there are certain reporting requirements that we will expect to be able to meet based on, what the subaward and those agreements look like. We will be working those out. We realize there are strings attached to this money because it's federal. However, from everything that I have heard from other localities and from what our experience has been so far, it is, as federal money goes, for this purpose, they did try to make it so that it would fit with a lot of the uses that we want to do as far as affordable housing goes. And so some of the requirements that I've gotten questions about aren't going to apply to this money, but some of them are, and the ones that are going to apply are a lot having to do with basic accounting principle type stuff. The NOFO was released last week. Yesterday we did a Q&A session. This is the re-recording of it. At the beginning of next week, the application is going to be live on the website. It will close at the end of September. We hope to finalize decisions and contracts by the end of this year. So I want to speak a little to the purpose of this fund. We want, with this $2 million, to create and preserve housing that has long-term affordability. This is a once-in-a-generation type of investment, and so we want to create units that will have lasting affordability, meet the needs of the impacted populations in Harrisonburg, and provide not just long-term affordable housing, but housing that is safe and high quality. We want rental opportunities, we want home ownership opportunities. We want those opportunities to be affordable, and when I say that, I know there's a lot of different ways to understand what we mean when we say affordable housing. For this, we mean housing that generally doesn't cost more than 30% of someone's monthly income. And that's not just the rent, that is the rent, the lights, the power, the heat, the water. And I just wanted to share before we get too far some of the numbers, and I will post these on our website. when I'm talking about affordable and populations, I speak in sort of HUD speak, which refers to a lot of, we'll say AMI, which means area median income. And these are the income limits that are generally used. Now, I will say different federal programs, even some of these numbers are rounded slightly differently. If you have a question, you can ask. I said I'll post our numbers and links to them on the website because they do change every year, and HUD puts these out. But generally, when we speak about extremely low income, we're talking about 30% AMI, low income 50%, very low income 50%, low income 80%, moderate income is 120%. And not everybody at various levels of these incomes are going to qualify for the programs, but I just wanted you to see these numbers so that you understood sort of where I'm coming from as I'm explaining who would qualify and what types of levels of affordability that we're looking for and who we want to be served by this money. Okay, so the money itself, the funds. We have this development fund and the opportunity to issue it and set up some terms, and we want to set up terms that will be useful to you as developers, as property owners. We also have the goal of receiving money from this for the long term. Like I said, this is a one-time source of money. We want to get the longest term of affordability, but we also want to have access to this tool over time. And one of the neat things about this funding was it's very explicit in the rules that it can be used in long-term loans, that when paid back, that money we can reuse for additional future housing purposes without the same restrictions. We can set up our own program with it. So we're really excited about that, the opportunity to build a loan fund with this. And so we want to set terms that are reasonable and that make this useful to you to get that affordability. So what we've come up with is a fully amortized loan at 2% interest over 20 years for rental development. For home ownership, we're looking at forgivable loans. And if you're an owner seeking to make capital improvements, we want to be able to evaluate on a case-by-case basis. And we think that 10,000 per unit max is reasonable. All of these terms, look, we do want to hear from you if something doesn't align with what you need. There's space on the application to give some feedback about what terms will match, and you would have to justify why. But you know, there is. We don't want this to be money that's out there that can't be utilized for this purpose. So we do need to hear some feedback about how to use how you want to use this and what kinds of terms you need and what kinds of conditions. And I have already received some questions about that, which I'll try to answer closer to the end of this. And just keep those questions coming. What I don't know yet, what we don't know yet, we will learn. We will get this going right. Our goal is to work with you, so help us do that. Okay. One of the main restrictions of this funding source is the time frame. The funds have to be obligated by the end of next year and expended by the end of 2026. It seems a long way off, but as you in the development world know, things move at a pace that is, you know, it's not a week by week or month by month. So that's going to come soon. The guidelines don't explicitly say that projects have to be finished by the end of 2026 as far as affordable housing goes. We want to work with you to come, you know, we want to get a realistic timeline from you, but we do need to have to set up contracts by the end of next year. And we have set some milestones that we do expect applicants recipients to be able to meet, and we will be building terms into any awards that say what would happen if those obligations aren't met. Also, I should say that we will have terms so that if part of the project is dependent on other funding sources that you would find out about this first, and then if another source of funding that's required to make your project work ultimately is not received, the award would be nullified or voided, because we do need to get all that money under contract. And if your project, you find out, let's say, we finalize this by the end of this year, and then for example, with tax credit, those applications are due in March, and if you find out in June that you don't get your tax credits, we're going to put the money somewhere else because we have to have it under contract by the end of 2024. Who's eligible to apply? We're really we're trying to be as open as possible, so nonprofits, for-profits, housing authority, partnerships, builders, owners. I think the only limit we have, this is not a fund for individual households to apply for. And so we'll need some documents, organizational documents, showing what your entity type is. We'll get to that. The minimum number of units that you can create is 2 housing units, affordable housing units. And so it can be in a larger development if you're doing, well, let me get to that later. Sorry. The project has to be located within the city of Harrisonburg. And at the time we receive your application, you have to have some form of site control. This cannot just be something that is out there on the market without some kind of option or contract. And we are also, if you own the property, that's great. If you are working, for example, with a faith institution and have a set up a long-term lease, like a 99-year lease to do something on that land, that's great. But it can't just be out there owned by somebody else with no commitment. You will need to be registered at sam.gov. I realize that might be a new thing for if you haven't done a lot of this type of government contract. Please reach out. We'll see what we can do to help. And then the other main thing on eligibility is meeting one of our priority focus areas. We have 3, and you have to address at least one of them. We either have to generate new units of long-term affordable housing for impacted populations, to preserve existing housing, affordable housing, and maintain that affordability in stock. You have to create affordable home ownership opportunities. A lot of these are, you can do more than one of these. So we either want to see new affordable units, long-term preservation for affordable units. We will also want to see home ownership opportunities. So as far as making new units, that obviously can mean new construction, creating a brand new affordable unit. It can also mean taking a space that isn't currently being used residentially and turning it into housing. And it can mean taking units that are market rate units and then rehabbing them and making them affordable. So and I think the example I gave yesterday is if there's a property that had historically been student housing, retrofitting that for families perhaps could conceivably be an option. Okay, preservation. Okay, there's a couple ways to look at a preservation or a rehab project. That can be an owner of an existing development that is maybe naturally occurring affordable housing already, making improvements, doing a property rehab, and then with that funding source, that commitment to long-term affordability. Or this can be an acquisition and rehab of existing subsidized housing. Maybe it had an affordability period that's ending. Purchasing it and re-upping that affordability period. Also, homeownership opportunities, and that can be developing new for sale units, either in new subdivisions or multiple lots, as long as they're part of the same overall budgeting and project. Or this can be something like taking non-residential spaces or vacant units and converting them into condos. A lot of expenses are eligible under this program. Acquisition is eligible. There are some conditions, I believe. I'm trying to remember. You can't buy it and sit on it. You have to buy it it has to be acquisition and tied to develop, like an imminent development plan. This is not about, holding on to it for later. Pre-development costs are eligible, infrastructure, site improvements, and actual construction or rehab. And probably a bunch more things. Feel free to ask. Again, the restriction, there are certain cost principles and guidelines. I consider myself kind of like a compliance background. So like I like reading CFR, but I'm not as familiar with the cost principles, but I'm happy to read them with you and with our team of city expertise and figure out any questions you have. We'll try to figure out so that we can see how to make this work. Expenses that we can't cover with these funds are the costs of market rate housing or costs associated with commercial space, reimbursement for past expenses, anything that you would like to do that is not actually developing long-term housing supply. We can't fund rental assistance or supportive service programs or emergency shelter. This money cannot be non-federal match for other programs. And it can't go to the cost of like loan guarantees, reserves, refinancing, or overhead. Again, if you're not sure, ask. If I don't know, I'll ask. We'll figure this out. I want to say one extra thing about mixed use and mixed income. This money can be used for the affordable housing part of that. If you are planning to do a more wide-scale project that includes non-residential purposes or units that will be regular market rate units with no eligibility restrictions, that's fine. Let's talk through it. Make sure that you're putting the right money in the right columns and that the percentages line up, just so that we meet our requirements from the reporting and the use perspective of this. Okay, and what is that? How are we showing that it's eligible? So projects must show that they are offering long-term affordable housing to impacted populations, and there's 3 ways that Treasury has spelled out that can be done. Either by the money going into a project that's also eligible for a list of federal programs, or the money's going into rentals that are restricted to serving at 65% AMI for at least 20 years, or another way to demonstrate a reasonably proportional response to the needs of an identified impacted population. I'm going to go through these in a little more detail. Federal program alignment. Treasury released a list of programs, and they're basically saying, look, if you are eligible if you are going in for these sources of money or being funded with one of these federal programs, then by definition, by what these programs do and you're already eligible. It's an eligible use. If you are getting, and I'm sorry, I put the abbreviations, so I will spell those out. If you are getting low-income housing tax credits as part of your funding, that program has its own limits on income and on affordability. And if you meet those, then it's an eligible purpose. That is the same with home funds. That is the same with National Housing Trust funds That is the same with HUD project-based rental assistance and HUD 202 and HUD Section 811. If you are getting those monies or are eligible to receive them, you will have a place on the application to certify that. And in doing so, whether you receive those monies or not, you, by certifying there, you're committing to the income restrictions, affordability period, tenant protections, and housing quality standards of that program or programs that you indicate. Okay. Oh, one special thing about tax credit applicants, if you get a loan and you get tax credit financing, you have to agree to waive your right to request a qualified contract as tied to the tax credit and repay any loan funds if the property becomes non-compliant. If you are a tax credit developer, you probably know what this means more than any of us. Oh, and that was what I was going to say about these programs. If you don't know whether you qualify for one of these federal programs, you can ask. We can talk through it. You would probably know if you are working with one of these programs, but do ask. I think there are some money that trickles down through the state that is some of these categories, and so if you're not sure, we can figure it out. The second qualification level is rentals at 65% AMI for 20 years. So if you are doing rentals and you say, these are the household income levels you'll commit to, and you can do some kind of, we can have some kind of enforceable legal way to set that and the 20-year period, that's eligible. If that's your commitment, it's an eligible use. Doesn't mean you're going to get the funding necessarily, but that means it's eligible. It's already eligible. That's who you're serving. This is here the other way, that third way. The justify that it's reasonably proportional as a response to the needs of impacted or disproportionately impacted populations. That is there for groups that, if it's not a tax credit development, if it's not project-based rental assistance, and it's not under 65% AMI, but we know that there's a need for it in our community, then we can be flexible with that. But we need to talk through who is being served and how do we know that they're a population that needs this housing. And is it based on where it's located? Is it based on other social vulnerability categories? And how are those determined? So how would those be determined and justified? So, for example, you might say households up to 80% of area median income that have mobility issues were impacted, or elderly households up to a higher income level. And so you might end up using this third category, this justify the proportional response. From any homeownership, it's likely there are some homeownership ones through those federal categories. But if you are doing a private development, basically this here is submitting just justification based on data. And a lot of that's in our housing study. And again, please call, let me help you find the information that you're looking for. But what we're trying to say is the part of the project that you're seeking funding for from this pot of money, the goal is that it goes to help people who really, really suffered from the pandemic and did not bounce back. And those are people often who were already struggling with housing before the pandemic. We have set some limits to what, we can do with that. Within, you can make justification within these limits. It's still got to be a long-term affordability commitment. We're capping income limits that we will serve to 80% for rental and 120% for home ownership. And even with, like I said, within that, that doesn't mean that someone at 80% for a rental qualifies. It means that we are open to finding that you can justify that they're eligible. But it's not automatic. The sales price or loan limit would have to meet Virginia Housing's guidelines, and if it's a rental, it would have to meet a version of a rent limit, either fair market rents, tax credit rents, something that correlates with the income level that you're serving, so it's affordable. And another way to do that I have here is payment standards. If there's a way, if you have a commitment to be working with the voucher program, if somebody has a voucher, what they're paying is by definition affordable. They're paying an income-based portion of their rent, and so that would qualify. Even if the rent is higher than those rents, the amount that they're paying is affordable, and so we would accept that. And I do have some of the those rent limits, and these again will be posted on the website. Review and selection process. So we're going to receive applications through the end of September. I'm going to screen them to see whether they are complete. The applications are complete, whether they follow the guidelines and meet all the funding criteria. Everyone that's eligible and complete is going to get scored and reviewed by an evaluation committee based on the criteria in the NOFO. And the committee is going to recommend awards based on how those score and the money that's available. There is no guarantee that we're going to be able to fund all eligible proposals. We want to fund as many opportunities as we can. We're going to look at some of the things that is going to count towards what we're looking for in a minute. But I do want to also add that this is one-time source of funding. If you've got an idea and it's just outside of what's going to work with this fund, I hope we will talk in the future too, because I think any of you that are interested in doing this kind of work and working with the city to do this, I want to work with you. Okay, so evaluation criteria. There's really like two categories of this that I've broken it down into two sort of buckets in the way that I'm thinking about it. One is like, can you get it done the way that you say you're going to get it done? Can it happen on time? Does the money add up? Do you have the people and the know-how to make this project happen? Experience and capacity. What's your track record? Who's on your team? Have you identified who you're going to work with? Have you done this kind of thing before? If not, are you partnering with somebody that has? Things like that. Timeline and budget. Does it look doable? Does the budget add up? Are the costs reasonable? Have you gotten, some of your funding already lined up? How much are you asking for? Site readiness. Do you have site control? That is a must. But beyond that, we are, where are you with the zoning? Is the project something that you can do by right? Have you started making plans for this? Are you working already with an architect or an engineer? Have you done some of that preliminary work? What do you know? What is already ready about the site? And then beyond that, we're looking at the second bucket is really like, what do we get from it? And that's, well, these are the 5 things, and I think we're just each of them is one. Right. They're in order. Okay, well, contribution to affordable housing and effective use of funds. So how many units are we getting out of this? How affordable are they? How long are they affordable? Who are they affordable to? We're looking at those maths. How much per unit are you requesting? How well is this aligning with other resources? Are the terms that we are offering you going to work for you? And then we're also considering, is this a preservation or a rehab project? Are you finding those spots around town and doing those projects that are like 4 to 12 units that really maximize use of resources in a way that we think that would be a good fit. Identified housing needs, does the location make sense for what you're doing, and that can be anything from, if you're working with, are you putting families by a school? Are you putting, are you near transit? Things like that. What type of housing are you building? Are you building 4-bedroom single family houses for individuals, or are you building efficiency units for families? I know that you all know what you're doing, but that's one of the questions. Explain why what you're building and how you're designing it meets the needs of who you're going to serve, and who are you going to serve? What populations are you looking to build housing for a specific population, not just by income, but by seniors, veterans, any other group that you've been able to say has needs that were impacted by the pandemic. And what is this project doing to deconcentrate poverty? Is it either you're doing affordable units in a mixed community, or part of, are you developing a subdivision that's going to be mixed income? How are you promoting housing stability? And we are looking at innovations and designs and things like, energy efficiency. What kind of amenities are you putting in? I mean, we really want to see, we don't want to see what, the stereotype of affordable housing, the worst image that people carry with them when they hear that phrase. We want to see housing that blends seamlessly with the neighborhoods, that's really high quality, that's meeting standards of today and tomorrow. And so we're looking at that. And we're looking at, do you have a plan to engage with your stakeholders in the community and build a public process for what you're doing? Okay. So there will be requirements for sticking to your timeline, for how we're going to be following up with, if you receive the award, on how you determine eligibility and how you are monitoring and complying with, oh, well, I said that it was all going to be at 65% AMI. Well, what mechanism do I have to just say, okay, well, it is. And on this again, if you're not sure, if you are a developer but you've not been in this affordable space, talk to me. I will see how I can help you. Some of you may have just started doing stuff like this and might want to help talk to some other people. We're all going to figure this out. If affordability and eligibility and things like that are new to you, we'll find a way to make that work. What are the terms? You know, if you don't comply, what happens? There's going to be obviously different compliance requirements in the construction period in terms of just reporting the fund use versus, you know, there is an affordability period and a loan period, and what are the reporting details there? We're starting to figure out some of the specifics as we move forward, and we'll answer questions as we receive them and as we can. Like I said, we do hope to finalize all this and have everything announced and in contract by the end of the year, although the actual award will be contingent on how you have to have the zoning before we will do the contract. And you also have to have the sam.gov in place. Okay, I do have some slides here that just sort of go through what the questions on the application are. And I'm starting to lose my voice, so I'm just going to show, you know, what kind of, you know, what are some details about your organization, like address, where the project's going to be and what kind of project is it going to be, how much does it cost, how many units, details about your site, how ready you are, how ready the site is, do you have site control of the zoning, the status of your site planning, what's your schedule, how are you determining eligibility of your beneficiaries, which category are you going for? As far as affordable housing and identified needs, just a chart of all the units and what AMI levels they're at. Who are you going to serve? How are you going to oversee it? Some questions about some of the features that your project's going to offer, location, type of building, fair housing. If you have done a market study, you know, that's a great thing to submit. We'll have a lot of space in the application for optional attachments, but that's the sort of thing that would be useful. You know, plans for community engagement. As far as financing goes, this is the kind of thing we'll ask for. There will be, you know, we do want to see, you know, all the whatever funding commitments you already have, sort of like a sources and uses sheet. For rentals, we would want to see some kind of pro forma. And then more on your organization and any development team players' experience and capacity. We would want to see as many documents as you're able to provide. You know, if you've got org charts and resumes and things like that, that'll help. I mean, there's some questions on the application, and you know, we really just want to see that you've got a team together that's going to be able to do it. And then there's going to be a place to upload all the attachments, a few disclaimers and certifications at the end. I kind of rushed through those last few ones because I felt like I was repeating it because it's partly what's required as partly the application. I think because of how long I've been talking and I'm starting to lose my voice, I am, rather than going through some of the questions I received, which were great, I'm going to save that for another file. I'm going to try to get that posted early next week. Like as a document, the questions I've received so far and the answers. So I hope this has been useful for you. Please reach out. Let me go. Please reach out and email me, call me, schedule a meeting so that we can answer your questions, find out what we need to. Really look forward to working with you, and thank you for the opportunity.